And welcome back to American Agenda. I'm Heather Childers along with Bob Sellers, and we do have some breaking news for you at this hour. We can take a look at this, a first look at former officer Kim Potter's mugshot after being arrested and charged with second-degree manslaughter earlier today in the shooting and killing of 20-year-old Daunte Wright. New video showing city officials put up barricades and fences. Take a look at this. This is her home. Kim Potter's home in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. The case sparking massive riots, protesters clashing with police for a third night, more than 60 arrested overnight. So what can we expect now, and will we see further violence? You know, we were just discussing this, Steve. I'll start with you regarding the charges for Kim Potter, which is second-degree manslaughter.
Right. Well, you know, first, this is just such a terrible situation, right? We have a dead young man, and now we have a police veteran of decades who is charged with very serious crime, somebody who doesn't appear to have been acting out of malice, but rather incompetence in a crisis moment. But here's the reality, I think, regarding it. I'm not an attorney, but I read very smart commentary from, I think, one of the best attorneys in America, Jonathan Turley, and he made the case, law professor at George Washington University Law School, he made the case that charging her with second-degree manslaughter under Minnesota law is overcharging, and that it may be similar to the Chauvin case in that it is likely that you're actually going to get an exoneration because the prosecutors are being too aggressive, that they both should have been charged with something lesser to get a conviction, but instead by overcharging and taking the risk of exoneration, what does that trigger? Well, very likely riots. You know, I think, unfortunately, that may well be in the offing regarding the Chauvin case. And here now we may be setting up another case where that could be the unfortunate reality.
Yeah. And what do you think, Jesse Jane? If they, you know, do this, will there be more riots in the streets?
Well, the city obviously is demonstrating they have a high tolerance for rioting because they don't stop it. And what they end up doing is that they impact those that have nothing to do with this, and they destroy the lives and livelihoods of those that they claim that they are protesting for. First of all, this traffic stop, there's no evidence it was a racial incident. He was pulled over with it because he had expired tags and apparently an open warrant. But when he tried to flee, she overreacted. That in itself, I'm not trying to simplify the man's death. I'm not trying to suggest that there's any reason that other than negligence, as Steve said. However, when we start destroying our cities and the cities don't crack down on it, you have riots going on indefinitely, such as in Portland. They must react, because having this violence and other lawbreakers come out and commit these felonies, I mean, raiding stores, that has nothing to do with this man's death. And it impacts the communities where they often cannot recover. In Washington, D.C., where I live, you have the U Street corridor that finally started to recover, maybe in the last 10 years, from riots that happened, probably before I was born. I mean, under the MLK era. So it takes a long time for these communities to survive and overcome.
And Derrick, this comes at the same time that there are increased calls for defunding the police or just ending policing altogether.
Yeah, I mean, that call right there, you know, Heather, makes no sense. And when we first saw the story, my brother-in-law, my sister, we were watching on the news, and we saw it, and we thought initially that this had to be an officer, you know, it was a couple of years on the force. We could not believe that she was 26 years in her career. And so for her to say that she made the mistake of drawing the weapon as opposed to the taser, I think that's a far-fetched. But here's the case where I went and read some additional information. Most often, it's not uncommon for an officer to mistaken their weapon for the taser. And in most cases, these officers not been charged. Only one officer was charged, and that was back in 2009 in a case in Oakland. And this guy received a manslaughter charge, which is equivalent to, in Minnesota, the second-degree charge, and he served 11 months in prison for taking someone's life.
So just to go back on what you were saying, you don't think that this was an accident, that she pulled her gun instead of her taser?
I want to believe that, but again, she's 26 years on this force, okay? She's 20, and they also talk about how these tasers, they're made of plastic as opposed to the guns. They're lighter in weight. In addition to that, you wear your taser on the side of your hip that is not your dominant hands to prevent you from pulling that. And so there's a lot of things that are put in place to avoid that from happening. So it just seems a little odd for her to be. And she was also head of the police union and trained other officers.
Interesting. And that was something, Bob, you and I were discussing. How does that happen? How does that mistake happen?
I don't know, but I do know Dante Wright was fighting with the cops and then jumped in a car, at which it becomes a dangerous vehicle, a weapon.
That's the issue.
And that was wrong on his part. And then the officer pulling, whether it was intentional or not intentional, that was wrong. You can think two things, but it could have stopped if he hadn't
done all those things that he did.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true.
All right. Jesse Jane Duff, Steve Cortez, Derrick Hollie, thank you so much. A great panel today. We'll be back with more of American Agenda after this.